I'm Ryan Grove. This is my wife, Tiffany Grove. We've been talking about alternative views of conventional history and crazy stuff at that. Want to start off with something today?
Well, I didn't have anything specific. I looked through a few of your ideas.
Such as?
Well, I traced back the history of Tartaria to see if there was anything
Credence
to
to my clear water?
I didn't find a whole lot, just that people feel that Genghis Khan comes from that region, and
Sure does.
some people thought that Genghis Khan was actually a Christian.
Well, we saw that story or argument being put together by that. He was a pastor, you said?
I don't know. know.
Well, some gentleman thinks that perhaps Genghis Khan was the beginning of... man, I feel weird even saying this. That he feels that Genghis Khan was actually Christ who came back and had his 1,000-year reign. I'm bringing it up because it relates to what we're saying. But that's how outlandish.
It sound like he's what's that?
And that the 1,000-year reign is already over.
Of Latter-day Saints. They have some really out there.
Yeah, I definitely don't subscribe to that in any way, but that's just an example of how far-reaching people's imaginations will go. Including mine sometimes. Well, the whole Tartaria thing, even if that weren't true, you have to admit that there's something to this megalithic construction that ancient people, they were onto something, is what I'm trying to say.
Like Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah, right.
That kind of threw everything on its head as far as dating, I think.
Well, the pyramids of Giza, for instance.
Oh, and now they're finding all those grid work for cities in the
Amazon
rainforest.
Yeah.
And that they think that there were cities there and that they actually farmed, and that once whatever, destroyed their city, when the city collapsed, that the buildings were just subsumed by the vegetation there because it's just so fertile.
The fact that these structures could even be built begs a question, or it begs to question conventional history's narrative, because the Giza, the pyramids, are supposed to be unreplicatable today with today's technology. Machu Picchu, South America.
That guy was renovating his basement and he found
a whole city. Found a whole city. He was renovating his house, and in the basement he punched a hole in the wall and he found a corridor that led to an entire city complex. Do you remember where that was? I don't remember.
Isn't that in Turkey?
I think it might be in Turkey.
I have it written down here somewhere.
So what's up with that? How if conventional history is true, then how could all of these impossible structures have been constructed in antiquity and before?
I had some ideas on
that's
how...
good. That was rhetorical, by the way.
Yeah, it's by Cappadocia, Derinkuru in Turkey. It's ancient Anatolia, but it was a multi-leveled city that they think was built between 1600 to 1200 BC. I had some ideas about what they could have possibly had as far as technology back then.
Okay.
And I found something called Wootz steel, which is a crucible steel. So
how do you spell that?
Capital WOOTZ, and the reason that they call it that is because they used to ship out these big cast iron slabs from like China, and they called them Wootz. and that's what they used to create, you know,
With steel.
yeah, whatever they were going to do with it. Of course, a lot of weaponry in general, but so, you know, maybe they had something like that a lot earlier because it was so easy to figure out how to make it. And the other thing is, recently we have found or created something called wood steel. And
So you got Woods steel and you got
I know,
wood steel.
that's how I found this one. This is a new discovery, an inexpensive new process, and they could possibly make even bullet resistant armor with it. The process densifies wood with 2 steps. They boil wood in a solution of sodium hydroxide and sodium sulfite is the second step, and it's a similar process as to what they use to create wood pulp, but of course they end up condensing it so tight without putting it in the chemicals. It didn't work before because the wood would expand again with like humidity and stuff. But with this process, it compresses it where it can't decompress, and it makes it really, really strong.
Huh, cool.
So if people were using like papyruses and stuff like that, you know, maybe they did figure out how to compress it.
Oh, so you're
and
saying
make it really strong.
that by
Like steel.
by
make
developing
tools.
like sturdy, durable, time-resistant paper, that someone thought in history, well, gosh, maybe we should do this with wood boards or something like that.
Something. I mean, maybe they actually had some of those simple chemicals, because NaOH, that's sodium hydroxide, is probably a really easy substance to come across. And if they used some of those chemicals already in processing their papyrus reeds into paper, then maybe they figured out how to make tools that way too. I don't know. I was just
That's pretty
thinking
cool.
of simple ways
that's pretty
without
cool.
high tech per se.
So it should be called steel wood,
Well,
really.
these guys
it's wood,
obviously
it's
though
hard as
had
steel.
some really good tools to be making some of this stuff.
Oh, well,
I mean,
obviously.
it's difficult to explain otherwise. And you know, they were in 2008 they were able to map the genome to some degree of the Denisovans. And
What are the Denisovans?
well, they're just some of our pre-Homo sapien hominids ancestors,
okay.
supposedly.
I haven't heard of them.
Anyways, the Denisovans have tools left behind from the Paleolithic era. Needles. They found a green bracelet with tool work that looked like a drill. And the majority of the Denisovan DNA is actually found in Australia, which is odd too, because you know, that would show migration a lot quicker and more across the board, in my opinion. I mean, I know Australia is a little closer to Africa.
But still, even those kinds of tools that you just mentioned, those seem to correlate quite easily with the traditional narrative. It's just that, I mean, that would seem like, if conventional history is true, that there are just pockets of extra ingenuitive people that come up with these clever little devices, but still those technologies still don't seem like they'd be sufficient to move like 100-ton slabs of perfectly cut stone.
When they do the Clovis Point analysis of the Clovis Points and the Clovis people, and that was originally our original history of the migration into the North American continent, they found all these Clovis points that they assume were attached to like spears, but they all seem to be made.
Clovis, that refers to a period of time that seems to delineate more modern Native American tribes from previous tribes. It's like an age.
Well, Clovis Point is just what they use. Like I was going to say, is they found these speartips kind of migrating what they thought across the continent, but then they found that they had come in from like the California coastline too, simultaneously with the people that were migrating from the north down through North America. And so
More into the heart of the land rather than along the coast.
so they thought that maybe this Clovis Point, once somebody figured it out, was actually kind of mass produced and sold in trade, because otherwise it would be unusual that the same tool would hit the coastline on this side of North America, and then the same tools are spreading up here at the top. So my point of that is just that new tools probably get out pretty quick.
Sure.
Kind of spreads, within a really short period.
Well, as you've been kind of looking into this, can't you see a clear pattern of prior to the 20th century or the 18th century that as the farther back in time you go, the more incredible the apparent technologies must have been.
Yeah.
Which is contradicting the conventional history, which shows a reverse crescendo of technology building upon technology. I mean, see, that's something that has to be contended with, I think, if somebody's really going to absolutely buy a conventional historical narrative.
Yeah, I think it is ironic to take these megalithic structures that we find across the continent and the existence of pyramids across the continents. It's funny that just by some small archaeological digs where we find pottery or clay shards or evidence of the way a certain group of peoples lived, that would be the thing that we would focus on in order to create the narrative. You would think it would be the exact opposite, that they would be looking at the megalithic structures and maybe assuming more from the culture and then working down towards like how did the peasants live or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because look how the peasants live here. Sure, there's some great structures, but if you would base our technology or society maybe on our house or a common middle class family, it would be quite different than if you looked at some palatial,
some skyscraper or something like that.
Right, penthouse or just whatever it is.
Do you have any way to account for the astrological alignments and relevance of a lot of these megalithic sites across the globe in relation to one another?
That also implies
crazy.
A definite understanding of the planetary cycles, and there's a lot of proof that we've known that for thousands and thousands of years. And there is something to be said for the argument that if you lay under the stars enough nights and toil under the stars,
that you'll
hunt
see
under
patterns.
The stars, that yes, you'll begin to discern certain patterns. But
how does that account for relationships, astrological relationships between significant points on the Earth, especially when they overlap with electromagnetic ley lines and all of this? So how do you account for that?
If there's
global?
Really such a thing as electromagnetic ley lines. I mean, there are points in the Earth that are more electromagnetically charged, but it's not like a grid.
It kind of is like a grid. There's an electromagnetic grid that definitely encompasses the planet.
And it fluctuates. But
the plane.
I would just say that to me, I just think trade was a lot more broad and expansive, and that the cities were probably quite a bit more advanced. I don't know how you could make those granite pillars above the king's chamber in that one burial place of the king that we watched.
I don't remember the name, unfortunately.
But how they could have those granite pillars raised up like that, and
Right.
not just one, but like multiple pillars.
And then have that
multiple-
same sort of engineering feat accomplished by ancient people all over the...
You know, people are willing to believe that there's aliens,
that aliens
arrived here and dumped all this technology on primitive mankind and left, and mankind had an awesome head start, but it sort of gradually lost its influence for a long time. Maybe it's like during the Dark Ages, etc., and that we've only now begun to recover. You know, and I don't know. There's a lot of people that believe that, but I don't. Is it any more weird to take a biblical view? And like I outlined a couple nights ago, how apparently angels, who presumably are presumably like super intelligent, you know, among many other amazing qualities, and that they would have an insight or an intimate understanding of the mechanisms of how God created reality, and that when they came down, they knew right away what to do, and how science worked, and engineering and chemistry, etc. And that is this harder to imagine than aliens, you know, like coming and dumping, and that if they came here, that right away they set to work trying to build buildings, probably, this is all speculation of course, but reflecting architecture and achievements that they initially were exposed to in heaven, and tried to replicate them down here. And of course we know at some point those angels were imprisoned, at least that's what the book of Enoch says, and then their offspring with human wives were giants, in that most of them were destroyed after the flood. And wouldn't it make sense that with those characters removed from the scene, that mankind was left after the flood sort of floundering and trying to figure out and reverse engineer
I don't know,
these
but we'll have to
technologies.
talk more about this next time, because you hear the dogs do not like to hear that motorcycle zooming around or something, and they're barking at us.
Oh yeah, you know, we've raised 6 kids, so during the course of raising 6 kids, I've developed this amazing habit where I could be surrounded by all kinds of stimulus and noises, and I have this special helmet that appears and protects me from hearing those, and I didn't even notice the dogs or anything like that. So, wait, one that you wanted me to point out that with the video that you titled Thomas Edison did what?
Right.
You did that because
we were gonna go into
I said Thomas Edison, and then you shut me off. Well, all I was going to say, it wasn't anything significant about Thomas Edison per se, but is it also too far of a stretch of the imagination to think that maybe this is being, according to the Tartarians, were in America and had an advanced civilization at one point, kind of stream, that he maybe didn't invent all of the inventions that he came up with, that perhaps he was purchasing and had his agents finding relics, and then he himself was reverse engineering and then recreating.
Well, Humphrey Davy made the first
Technology.
electric light, and then Joseph Wilson Swan made the first light bulb. So,
Well, I mean,
we're working on it. He wasn't the only one. He's just the one with all the money and all the friends. I'm sure there was some nepotism involved in that.
well, there seems to be this hell-bent drive to ignore Nikola Tesla's discovery of free energy. And there was that battle between AC and DC currents, and all that stuff. There seemed to be almost a conspiratorial insistence that Thomas Edison would, in his way, his inefficient yet super marketable way, would achieve supremacy, while Nikola Tesla's accomplishments and discoveries were swept under the rug eventually.
Yeah, I heard Nikola Tesla thought that Edison's idea was dumb, but he at least kind of talked him into alternating current. I think that's why Thomas was opposed to it initially.
You know, well, maybe, this is just a guess too, maybe the powers that be, who I love to reference all the time, because I don't know who exactly they would be.
Yeah, you can't make any money off of the free technology.
Not only that, but maybe they were also understanding a whole new level of technological potential.
Oh, that they didn't want to release it to the common people yet,
right, and so
they could use
they
it
used
for...
Edison to lead us down one path, while they were quietly developing
Sure.
another path.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what I think the
can
whole
see
20th
that,
century
yeah.
has been, actually. And I think that the powers that be have achieved this whole new level of technology that you and I would just be shocked to ever be exposed to, while we've been, you know, stumbling down this clumsy road of inefficient technology from the telegraph.
Yeah, that's why they gave us
finally
Windows,
to
right?
the cell phone. Well, wouldn't that be, you know...
Well, we have to get off of here because our battery's going to die.
Well, let me pose one more just fun question.
Okay.
Have you ever, when you were a kid, thought, you know, I wish I had a time machine and I'd go back with my cell phone and my machine guns and I'd go back and to the days of cowboys and Indians or knights, and I would totally whoop. Maybe you didn't because you're a girl, but I think several boys have entertained a fantasy similar to that at some point. The reason you would fantasize that is because there would be two technological paradigms.
I just always thought I would go back and warn the person so they didn't.
Well, I've also thought about that and like, well, no, don't listen to Hitler. Listen, this is what's going to happen. But the reason that would be such a pleasing fantasy for a boy, a young man, or a child rather, would be because of the paradigm, the two radically different paradigms actually interacting with one another, and obviously the kid going back to his gun and his technology and stuff would have a vastly superior advantage, you know, over the people of that time. And I think possibly that the government is kind of creating that same paradigm disparity, but they don't have to go back in time.
They just have to
That they're actually trying to
keep information up from.
And I think there might be something to this whole alien disclosure thing that's coming out, where that's their spun way of introducing soon these radically new technologies that they've been developing for a long time. But anyway, that's pretty crazy. Something to think about. It's good fun. Love you. Until next time.